Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Lords of Limited. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, Mr. Ethan, Essence Reliquary Sax. We talked about it last week, Ethan. Have you played with this gem?
I haven't yet. Unfortunately, I
Wow.
drafted it once because in classic, like, we foretell the future on this podcast. The first draft that I did after we recorded last week, I had an Essence Reliquary in the pack, and
So
I
you
was like,
played.
it could wheel, whatever, but I'm just gonna take it. Scooped it up. A deck for it was not open, so that was bad. And then I drafted a really good. I've drafted decks that would love an Essence Reliquary, but cannot find it. And let
They've
me
been
tell you,
nowhere to be found. Listen, I was on a quest all week. I was on a mission. I was like, just build it and they're going to come. And I kept building it and they kept not coming. I finally got it this weekend. I've done it twice now, and it is as fun as advertised. It's sick.
I forgot. I actually have played with it because I did a paper draft at my house on Friday, and I okay, so here's what happened. Pack one, pick one, Kappa Cannoneer, then pretty low power level packs so I started taking red cards. I think I got like a charge bug, pick 3 or whatever. But weirdly in paper, to my right, my friend J Maz is there, and I see him take the red MDFC, pick 3, the 5-mana 2/2 gets back a spell.
Yeah. The monk.
And I'm like, well, maybe we'll see. Maybe we could both get into red. I don't know. I keep no other reason to not take red cards. Take 1, pick 4, pick 5. And I see him take a second monk, pick 5. And I'm like,
Ooh.
all right, let's just throw these picks away. So move into like a mostly mono black artifacts deck with a little bit of blue we had the Cannoneer. I got the white Wrath, the Energy Wrath pack 2, which was nice, and I got an Essence Reliquary, and I got to do picking up Refurbished Familiar and replaying it to get their whole hand and then start drawing cards. Yeah, that was pretty sweet.
The other thing that's awesome that you can do is you can kind of make land drops. Like if you missed your land drop, you can pick up a land, replay it, do the thing. The card is so flexible. It does so much. I misplayed with it so hard the first time I played with it because it can do so many things.
Right. Well, it's so hard because you don't often think about on your turn as a mode of a card, right? You think about like it can be instant speed or sorcery
speed. Yes.
Not it can be instant speed on my turn.
I was able to do, I had Ocelot Pride, the first striking lifelinker, and I was able to do first strike lifelink damage, pick it up, recast it so that I could get the trigger without it dying.
There was so much that's ridiculous cool stuff. Wow. Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's awesome. Yeah, very, very cool card. I would still like to cook with it a little bit more. Speaking of that draft, the Essence Reliquary draft, I told you about this, but I'll tell our listeners. I beat the triple Writhing Chrysalis deck in the finals with just mopey black, the worst color in the format.
Lies.
Just got there.
It can't be done. I don't believe it.
Done. My opponent did.
Receipts or it didn't happen.
They did play Emrakul on turn 5.
I assume you lost that game.
That was the game against them I lost. Yes.
Triple Chrysalis, no problem. Emrakul.
Emrakul, a little bit of an issue. Yeah, for sure. Well, because I'll tell you what's actually, we shouted this card out last week, but I'll tell you what's actually kind of a good answer to Chrysalis is a Cursed Marauder, the black 2/1 make them sack a non-token. Like
that card's just good. I've finally come around.
Yeah, Marauder is.
It's either. I used to think it was either great or garbage, and now I think it's either great or good. Like it's never really bad.
Yeah.
But that card is super sick. Honestly, I feel good about our Writhing Chrysalis takes last week. The card's very good. It's not the be all end all for the format.
Yeah, no, I'm with you for sure. So we're gonna talk. We got a lot of feedback. We sort of teased this a little bit last week about doing some chatting about pivoting in the format. I still am on non-zero train wrecks in the format, so I'm hoping that Ben can teach me the ways to sort of keep the draft on rails going forward. But a lot of folks let us know like, hey, that would actually be really helpful. So I think we are going to talk about pivoting this week, which is going to be awesome. So before we get into that, let's chat about the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. The show will always be free. We are in the midst of Arena Open weekend. Usually Ben and I will draft before the episode, but we've got the PT next week. So we'll be doing all like draft log reviews then. So I think we'll just focus on pivoting this week. But cheering on all the folks in the Discord, which is what everybody who gives back via the Patreon gets access to. Cheering on those folks. Hope their drafts go well today, and that we get a lot of people getting the 2K prize. And I'm sure we've got a qualifier weekend coming up too. So those high stakes events are really nice. There's actually an MTGO super qualifier next weekend that I'm going to try and play in. That's a top 4, get an RCQ or get an RC invite. So we'll try and do that next weekend. So I'm sure we'll have some folks playing in there. So I think any of the high stakes events, especially when they're sealed, are nice to be in the Discord for, because you get some feedback from some like-minded limited individuals. And we have some great rewards as you move up the reward tier rankings over at the Patreon page. So check that out if you want to give back to the show. And I have some great news this week, Ben. Because we're going to be welcoming in a whole host of individuals this week, and a lot of them are named Ethan. So we want to welcome to the fray this week Gavin, Beauty Man, Solomon, Rossi, Crimson, Michael, Andrew. Not 1, not 2, but 3 Ethans, an Etham, which I'm not sure was a typo or a joke, and a Smeathan. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Well, really, it's 6, right? Beauty Man also obviously isn't Ethan.
Oh, there it is. We got 6. We got 6 of them. Yeah. So I really can't believe it. It's great, like, targeted marketing that you did last week by pressuring Ethans to join the Patreon. I never thought of that as a great campaign, but it worked. So we really appreciate the support.
David's next week. It's your week, David.
Can I interest you in a JLK? What's the play?
Always.
Great. All right, well, let's dive in. So this is actually from little old me. This came up this week on stream. We're in the midst of as we're going to find, and I think some, unless we're doing opening hands, in MH3, what's the play is the board states are complicated, but I'm going to try and just synthesize down to what the important information is, because basically this what's the play is about what are we casting this turn. So it's turn 6. In play, we're a little bit behind on board. We're at 14, our opponent's at 20, but we're kind of stable here. They've got a bunch of little creatures out. They've got a Hex Gold Slith, they've got a Mandibular Kite with a germ attached to it, and they've got a Servo token in play. And on our side, we've got a Lonely Rosecott Knight, the 4 and a white 3/4 Vigilance. I know Rosecott Knight not great, but I actually had like 8 or 9 hits in this deck, so I was playing double Rosecott Knight to shore up.
I played a non-embarrassing amount of Rosecott Knights now that I've been on the Essence Reliquary life.
I mean, yeah, it's not like finds Reliquary and then you can pick it up with Reliquary to re-trigger it. It's not bad. It's not bad.
Still not good.
Still not good.
But it's not bad.
For our opponent's last turn, they did nothing with their mana. So they have 4 untapped lands, 2 plains, 2 swamps, and they played a Glasswing Grace tapped as a land last turn, the Black-White Aura. So they have 4 untapped lands, and they played a 5th tapped land. Our turn, we have 4 lands in play and a Solar Transformer. We have 3 energy in the tank, so can tap that for any mana. We're a Jeskai deck. We have access to Jeskai mana with our mana base, but we don't have access right now to double blue, which is important for what's in our hand. Our hand is the following: 2 copies of Static Prison. That's the white enchantment that removes a creature, and then you pay energy every turn unless you sacrifice prison. Detective's Phoenix, the 2 and a red 2/2 flying haste, bestow, single red, collect evidence 6. I was playing half the games of this thinking that it was escape 6 rather than collect evidence 6.
Well,
so I was like overpaying
but
for
the
it.
other thing that I realized when I played with it is I thought it was only bestow from the graveyard.
I did too.
Straight from your hand by collecting 6, which is also just illegal when you do that because it's only a single red mana.
Detective's Phoenix is excellent. Okay, so 2 prisons, Detective's Phoenix, a Royal Cartographer, the 1 and a blue 1/3 that gets energy with landfall and you can draw cards with. A Hopeender Coatl, 2 and a blue 2/2 flash flyer, and it counters a spell on cast unless the caster of that spell pays 1, and another Rosecott Knight. So a hand full of action, 5 mana available. What's going through your head as you're looking at this? And like the board, like I said, like we're like kind of stable, right? Because we're only getting pecked by the Mandibular Kite right now, but we only have the Rosecott Knight out. So they kill that, and then like the floodgates open again.
I mean, from the biggest picture thing I'm thinking, looking at this board, is, as you said, stable. The biggest thing that stands out to me about this is we have 6 cards in hand, and our opponent has 2.
Right.
So my biggest overarching thought here is just don't accidentally die. I feel like if I can prevent anything terrible from happening, I'm in a pretty good spot to win. And certainly double Static Prison is going to help with that. It's going to catch lots of things So mostly then my thought process shifts to, well, how can I impact the board the most or use my mana most efficiently? And there's not great permutations here, right? Because we've got 5 mana available and some 3s and 2s and 1s and a 5, but the 3s and 2s are both double blue. I guess your other option is, the most mana efficient option is you could play Royal Cartographer plus Detective's Phoenix. That kind of impacts the board the most, but I don't love playing Royal Cartographer on turns when I don't have a land drop. And also, ideally, you'd kind of like to bestow Detective's Phoenix. I guess you don't have to. But like, really, there's not a great game-breaking play you can make out of your hand here. So I'm going to kind of throw it over to you. What do you think?
So the one thing that I was stuck on here, and perhaps I was reading too much into this, but I just think like, if this is a piece of information that you're not picking up on as a player, I thought that this would be a good moment to highlight it, which is that our opponent had 4 mana, right? Plains, Swamp, Swamp. And what they chose to do was play their 5 mana aura as a land tapped. And that tells me that they have spells in hand. Spells that cost more than 4 mana, right?
Right, because they're already down on cards. So there's no way they would throw away that Glasswing Grace willingly with as choked as they are for actual cards.
Right. So, because normally I think that this, I mean, you talked about not wanting to play Cartographer without a land drop, but I think normally this is just like, how do I use my mana the most efficiently? And there's nothing I really need to kill with Static Prison this turn. But so I would just play Cartographer and Phoenix, use all 5 of my mana, affect the board the most, etc. But I was just like, look, I'm pretty sure if this Hopebender Coatl is going to do something, it's this turn cycle, because they just chose to do this thing with, like, this tells me they have 2 spells in hand, and maybe those 2 spells cost more than 4 mana. So they might tap out next turn. And if they are, it's going to happen next turn. And that's when I'm going to get to nab them with the Coatl. And I would have loved to be able to play Cartographer, hold up Coatl, but I don't have double blue, as I said right now. So I opted to just sort of, in case this passing with mana open play blew up in my face, and they chose to move the kite onto a Hexgold Slith, and then I would have a real problem blocking it, and it was going to be big. I decided to cast Static Prison on the Mandibular Kite, and then pass with Hopebender Coatl up to counter whatever they were going to play.
It's interesting, yeah. I do like holding up Hopebender Coatl here, knowing that they've played the tap land. The only way you could get burned, potentially, is if it's a 5-drop and they top deck another land.
Yes.
But even then, it's worth the opportunity cost to go for it, because I think clearly they're going to do something. The thing that you said that I didn't necessarily pick up on, I thought it was a little aggressive using Static Prison on the Mandibular Kite. But I think if you're going to do this, you have to account for the fact that they could just be putting Kite on Hexgold Slith.
Yeah.
Because you are, I guess you're not that far behind. You're okay with that, though, right? Because they spend their whole turn and 4 mana to deal 4 damage to you, and then you can just Static Prison the next turn.
Yeah, but then their Slith is like, so then what am I static prisoning? Am I static prisoning the Slith and then they still have Kite? I mean, I guess I have 2 flyers in hand, so it's not that big of a deal. But like, it just felt preventative in a way that, like, and I have another Static Prison as well.
Sure.
So,
I mean, the thing I don't love about it is it's taxing your energy for the rest of the game, because you really don't want Kite to come back as a 1/1, and you do have this Cartographer.
Yep.
It's close. I definitely think you hold up Hopebender Coatl. I don't know that I would have made the next leap and Static Prison to the Kite, but I kind of like it. I think there's pros and cons.
Yeah.
To that one.
So a Johnny Fells the Pride was their play next turn, and they did not have a 6th land, and I got to just bink.
Nice.
So, like, I obviously, like, if this play doesn't counter a 5-drop, it's probably not as exciting and interesting to take a look at. But like,
I still think it's the right thing to do, even if they play their 6th land and play a Johnny Fells. Like, you gave yourself a chance to hit the Hopebender Coatl, and like I said, you're stable, and so you just want to try to account for what could go wrong. And holding up Hopebender Coatl is because you still get to have that efficient turn next turn.
Correct.
And if they play something that costs 5 and play their 6th land, you also have Static Prison to clean up the mess. Like, it's pretty low opportunity cost to hold up the Hope Ender Quaddle here.
Right.
And very high upside if you hit.
Very high upside, right, which is what it felt like.
Aiming for those ceilings, baby.
That's exactly right. So like just throwing out that kind of information of like, oh, they played this thing as a land. What does that mean? They haven't used their mana otherwise. Like, it means they got something to do with all of that mana. And if you're not picking up on that stuff, I think you're leaving a little bit of equity on the table. So there's our little what's the play. First, what's the play of the MH3 season? Let's talk about pivoting.
I've been doing a lot of pivoting, as we saw in my logs. Basically, I mean, we should preface this by saying that I'm pretty reluctant to draft Eldrazi for a number of reasons. One, I just want to stick it to Writhing Chrysalis. Two, I don't.
There's only one way to bring down the win rate of Writhing Chrysalis, and that's to beat it.
That's
not
right.
to play it yourself.
Exactly, because if I play it, it's just I'm gonna inflate.
You're just gonna elevate it.
We can't have that.
Exactly.
I need lesser people playing it so that I can beat them and just kind of show people the way.
Exactly.
I also just don't love the way Eldrazi as a deck feels. Like ramp decks are my least favorite style of deck to play. And I don't know, I just feel like drafting Eldrazi, much like the Artifacts deck, is pretty high risk, a much higher reward than the Artifacts deck if you hit. But just taking cards like a 2-drop ramper or things like that pretty aggressively feels bad to me. I don't love it. Other good stuff in the pack.
I feel
like Nightshade Dryad.
I feel so differently about, because I like the puzzle of, especially with the Eldrazi deck as a ramp deck, and this is very off topic, but I like the puzzle of sequencing ramping stuff, especially like figuring out, okay, do I want to have this thing in play so that then, like, do I want Path of Annihilation in play first, or do I want my Chrysalis in play first, so then my Annihilation will let me potentially double spell the turn after?
The Eldrazi deck doesn't get a double spell. Who are we kidding? It's one spell per turn over and over, unless you have Path of Annihilation.
I think we may have found perhaps an issue in your playing with this deck is that you think you can't double spell with it. So I'm not sure what's going on there, but yeah. But I do think like it, as we've seen in, I think, a number of sets recently, there is a bit of there's a known quantity in the format. Everyone knows that Chrysalis is busted and that green Eldrazi decks are very good. And so when you have a start of like, okay, I'm going to take Path of Annihilation, or I see a Path of Annihilation in the draft, or start of Chrysalis, or you see a Chrysalis in the draft, you're entering into a game of chicken. In my mind, right?
Yes,
and
I agree.
And like Ben is, I think, definitely on the end of the
spectrum. As soon as I see the other car coming, like I'm off like 100 yards out.
He's looking for any reason to get pushed off of it. I think other people perhaps maybe a bit more tempered in their approach and think about like the reasons to hold on and what's going to lock them in and what's going to be a reason to move off or to splash or whatever. What are the pivot points? And we're going to talk about that because I think that's a big part of it. But I also think in a larger, even beyond that, like all of the sort of streamlined synergy things that happen in the format are also kind of like, if they don't come together or you don't end up in a spot where you're doing a good mix of two synergy decks, right? The Energy Eldrazi decks, like you also, those are my train wrecks, is when I'm like, all right, I'm going to gumption my way into black red or whatever. And then it's just not there. And I don't have an off ramp plan. That's when I have my train wreck drafts.
That's fair. I think red black is the scariest. I think red black is the next most likely deck that happens for. I generally want to see Crainial Rams kind of late before I commit to black red.
I want to make the hottest of hot takes. Which is that I don't think Crainial Ram is that good.
What? That is blasphemy. You can't say things like that in the podcast, my friend.
I don't know. You're saying you don't think Eldrazi gets to double spell and you don't want to draft it. We're both. I'm just trying to keep pace with you. I can't put my finger on it and I can't express it. And I wanted to be like, well, let me sort like game in hand win rate for black red deck specifically. And obviously Crainial Ram is like up there. Like I wanted to be like, I bet it's not even that good in black red, but like it is. I think it goes back to what you said about if you want to be aggressive, having to get through evasively or with trample. And I feel like Crainial Ram not doing either of those things it just ends up feeling more awkward to me. I'm sure this is a user and skill issue, but I just I'm not in love with Cranial Ram.
Like I think much like what your incredulation at my Eldrazi statements,
Mhm.
I think Terramanders and the refurbished familiars and suiting it up on flyers or putting it on a charge bug that has menace. Like it's not
Are
that it
you
needs it. Like you play it, you trade it off, and then you're always threatening to equip it on something. So your opponent kind of has to count for that, but you don't always have to spend your mana to do that.
are you ever just like happily getting rid of the germ and moving it to one of those flyers?
Yes.
Okay. I think that might be the thing I'm never doing.
Yeah, I mean, like, my goal with Black Red is to get the game done, like, as quickly as humanly possible,
My
and to
goal-
vomit my hand as quickly as humanly possible.
Yeah, I think my goal with Black Red is to just not draft it, but that's yeah.
Okay, so back to the pivoting. Back to
Yeah,
the.
back to pivoting.
That was a nice heart to heart we had there.
Thank you.
Why are you pivoting? I think because your archetype that you're currently drafting, you think you're getting cut out of. Like, so I think the most clear way to state that is you're being incentivized to take weaker cards, looking at you, Nightshade Dryad, or other things when there are better options in the packs. Like you can't be taking Nightshade Dryad over, Conduit Goblin or some of the other gold
Yes, you
cards.
can.
Yeah.
Yes, you can.
We're off to a great start here.
I appreciate the sentence.
Rosie the Riveter.
Yes, you can. No, yeah, I won't get bogged down in the muck of the actual examples, because context is also important. Like what you're describing is like it matters what your start of that draft is too, where you're taking Nightshade Dryad over Conduit Goblin, right? Like, do you have Path of Annihilation and Writhing Chrysalis? Then yeah, you're absolutely taking Dryad there, right? Like,
yes.
you had to think about it for a minute, folks.
I did have to think about it for a second, but
Yeah.
I would take Nightshade Dryad over Conduit Goblin in that spot.
Yeah, but your point stands that like on power level, if it's pack one pick one, though I reject the premise that we're ever picking between two commons, pack one pick one.
That's been clearly stated.
Yes. Conduit Goblin is much better than Dryad in my mind.
Yes, I am glad that we line up on that. So the other thing that would lead you to pivoting is you're seeing signals for other archetypes, preferably that touches at least one of your two initial colors. Like, say you're starting red-green and you're pretty deep into red and you see that Conduit Goblin, or maybe you're blue-red energy and you see some sneaky snackers that touch blue. But and notice that I'm listing those gold commons. I think the gold commons that are cheap in the streamlined decks, like the decks that really want to be hyper-focused to colors, I think those are the biggest signals you can see in the format, like seeing those picks 5 through 8 or wheeling them.
Because they're such great. That's a spot where like the rarity of commons matters. And that's another great way to, as I'm trying to figure out how we're thinking about commons in the play booster era, but it's a great way to think about like, you can get so many of them. Like if you're wheeling Sneaky Snacker and then you decide to move into blue black for it, and you can think to yourself, any Sneaky Snacker that gets opened, and I'm likely to maybe get two more, they're going to make their way to you. And that is a powerful recipe, especially for something where you're throwing away some earlier picks to pivot.
Right. And I think the last big reason to pivot, or last common reason to pivot, is in pack 2 opening a premium card that you can either splash, or that maybe it's a red card, or maybe it's a black card. Maybe you open a Crabomination in pack 2 and you want to move into black for that. I think opening some of the better, stronger individual rares in the set could also be a reason to pivot, especially if you don't have a super streamlined synergistic start.
I think it's like there's a chain reaction sometimes too, of like you get a late card that isn't, perhaps I think you have a draft later on where this might actually exactly happen. You get a late gold card, like wheel a Soulfire of Emissary of Soulfire, the 1 white blue 1/4 gets 3 energy, and then you can pay 2 energy to put exalted counters on stuff, and then you open a Genku. And so maybe the Emissary isn't enough to be like, oh, now I'm pivoting to blue-white. But that plus, oh, now I've opened something powerful that's in that same space. That powerful card I'm opening, plus the information I got from that card wheeling or going super late in pack 1, is going to add up to me saying, all right, now I'm moving into this deck.
Yes, 100%.
The thing that of point two of like, and obviously it's like, this is clear. This is how you read signals, like cards that are powerful going later than they should. But the interesting thing and the thing that I struggle with, the thing that I think is specific to this format is there are packs where there are clear best cards, and then there are packs where the power level is flat.
Yes.
And knowing when, and I think it's easy to, because a lot of the packs I think are flat power level, it's easy to then think that to miss the packs where there are clear best cards, because you've gone, like, what I'm talking about is like a spot where you're like, let's say you start with a card that's worth taking, like let's just say Chrysalis. So you start with Writhing Chrysalis, and then you see like flat power level. And so you're just taking cards that go along with Writhing Chrysalis.
Yes.
And then you see Riddlegate Gargoyle. And it's like, well, that's the clear best card in the pack. It is hard.
And that's the one, that's the white blue 2/2,
yes,
right?
White blue 2/2 gets 3 energy, and you pay 2 energy to give something lifelink when it attacks. And maybe pick 4 is a little early for that. But let's say you've even got flat power level on whatever, pick 4 and pick 5, and then pick 6, you see the Gargoyle. It is really hard for me in that spot, if I've gone down the flat power level path, to make those pivots. I think those are the ones I think are the hardest for me to make, when I'm like, well, I'm already so deep in this other thing. It's like, yeah, but that other thing you don't have any reason to do other than your pack 1, pick 1. So like, why not speculate? And then because there's also a depth of playability in this format, I find that I can, if then I take Gargoyle and then it's flat power level again, well, what do I give weight to in that
You're
pack?
going back to Writhing Chrysalis at that point, because it's a better card, probably.
Okay. Well, yeah, but then I want to like keep turning the knobs on this example to be like, okay, but what if it's not as good a card as Chrysalis, then Riddlegate Gargoyle is a little bit better of a card. I don't know, like, but those are the ones that's hard for me, because like when I'm deeper in one lane, but I don't really have that strong of a reason to be in that lane, I find it hard to jump ship, because at a certain point I have to decide. I'm always waiting. I'm like, can I just get some like big signal, and then after that a clear path that supports that signal? That doesn't always happen.
No, draft is messy and beautiful, and
that's
part of why it's great. But I think one of the things that sticks out to me in that specific example is that the Riddlegate Gargoyle doesn't touch either of the 2 colors of the Writhing Chrysalis. If it does, I mean, I don't know why you would be doing this, but let's say it's the 3/3 ooze that's 1 black-green that you can adapt, put a +1/+1 counter on. Then all of a sudden you can take green cards and still give yourself outs to be both decks without feeling like you're choosing between option A and option B. There's a Venn diagram in the middle for you. And when they're both like blue, white, red, green, there's no space in the middle to hold on to in the Venn diagram, which makes it really tough. And then you do get pulled in other directions. So I like, much like you reject the premise of not first picking between 2 commons in the play booster era, I kind of reject that premise, because I don't know that Riddlegate Gargoyle is good enough, but I'm with you with the intent of the example.
I'm just trying to come up with examples on the fly here, but yeah.
Sure. But I think it's not quite enough. Like, there are reasons to totally jump ship like that. Like, let's say you get a Genku, pick 6, like,
sure,
right? Like, you take the Genku and you scrap everything in your blue-white from that point forward. So I think like there's, the more you're pivoting, like the further you're turning when you pivot,
if you're going the full
power level of the higher the power level of the card that you're taking needs to be. But I think ideally maybe you're turning 90 degrees, like you're finding something that shares a color, and then you have that space in the middle of the Venn diagram where you can kind of toe the line to make your decisions easier.
So what are the questions you're asking yourself as you're drafting?
I think the first thing is, I would encourage everybody to check in after every single pick. And the first question I would ask is, am I taking the best card out of the pack? And if the answer to that is no, I think you should have a very good reason why. And so in your example, like let's say your Chrysalis pick 6 Riddlegate Gargoyle example, you still take the Gargoyle, and then you just feel it out from there. Maybe you never take another blue or white card because you keep seeing some red and green cards that can go with your Chrysalis, and you want to play your Chrysalis because it's a better card. But maybe red and green dries up totally, and you have to take a couple white cards, and then you open a really good white card, and that's when and how you pivot. So I think speculating on picks, a lot of times we say take a flyer on a pick, and we always get questions in the Discord about like the slang for what is take a flyer. it's that. It's taking a card that is very high upside if it does make your deck, but is very low percentage to actually make your deck based on what you've already picked so far. And I think Riddlegate Gargoyle would be that in the scenario you've described. But there's
Right.
tons of times that's happened to me. I speculate pretty aggressively on picks so that is how I've found I'm pivoting the best in the format.
Do you find that, like, usually I say that basically pack 2 pick 2 to pack 2 pick 4 is usually when you lock in what your deck is in a normal format. Is that the same here?
It's the same here for me. I think I'm either locked at the end of pack 1, like either pack 1. I think drafts go a couple ways in this format. Either you start down a path and the path is open and you're locked, like, and maybe you don't necessarily know what it's going to be, but frequently for me it's been energy, and I know I'm some sort of energy at the end of pack 1, and I'll figure it out later, but I'm not too worried about that once I've identified that energy is open, for example. And I think the other most common type of draft is you start something, feel that you're pushed off of it, and pivot out for one of the 2 color commons. Like you pivot for a Conduit Goblin, you pivot for a Riddlegate Gargoyle, you pivot for a Sneaky Snacker. Those are the most common types of drafts to me. And then I think also sometimes lately I've had a string of opening awesome opens in pack 2 and have been pivoting in pack 2, early pack 2, like pack 2 pick 1, trying to see if it'll work, and it has actually kind of worked out. Other thoughts to be talking to yourself about during the draft after every pick. And I think it's so important in this format because the picks change so much. And I think the other thing that's settled down to me, and I think maybe would not have if you haven't done a ton of drafts. Like if you're on draft 5 through 10, I think the format can still be pretty overwhelming. Like I remember initially, like you see the packs that have the Sneaky Snackers and the Faithful Watchdog, and then it's got some other thing that goes in some other deck, and you can just feel pulled in all these different directions, but none of the cards really stand out above each other.
That's
And I
that
think
flat power level kind of pack that we're talking about.
right. And I think when I look at those packs now, I feel less like, well, am I supposed to jump ship for this Faithful Watchdog? Am I supposed to jump ship for the Sneaky Snacker? Largely the answer is no, until they're definitely the best cards in the pack. I just have a better sense of what I'm willing to jump ship for and why, but hard to convey that through a podcast unless you've played with the cards quite a bit.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I think the other thing you should be thinking about is what archetypes am I still open to after every single pick? Like pack 1, pick 1, Galvanic Discharge, you're open to any red color pair. You know what I mean? Pack 1, pick 1, Writhing Crystals, you're Eldrazi. And I think much more room to explore there, but generally that's what you're hoping to do. And then maybe your next pick is Attune the Narrative, and then you're open to energy or Eldrazi or whatever. But just that thought process of, am I taking the best card? Hopefully, yes. If not, very good reason why you're not. And then what archetypes am I open to? And then lastly, what archetype am I most likely to end up in right now? Like after every single pick, like after pack 1, pick 3, most likely to be Eldrazi. Pack 1, pick 4, still most likely to be Eldrazi. Pack 1, pick 5, I'm like 80% to be Eldrazi, but maybe there's 20% chance I end up red-black artifacts because I got a late Crainial Ram.
I love this. This is so like my frequent question that I ask myself is mid pick. I'm like, okay, what is the path? If I take this card, what is the path where it ends up in my deck? Like I think about how does the draft play out? But you're talking about, okay, you've made your pick and now assess like what I mean, it's sort of like you're probably doing it at the same time. You're like, okay, as I'm taking a card, what archetypes am I open to, whatever. But like it's interesting, you're sort of like taking stock of what you've drafted after each pick rather than like doing it in the moment with the pick, you know?
I think I do it afterwards. I mean, if I'm torn between 2 cards, which is not that often. I mean, sometimes I
What's
am.
it
But
like?
if I'm torn between 2 cards, I'm doing it in real time, like for this card and this card. But more than anything, after I make the pick, I'm trying to see how many paths I have left available to me. Like you start out with 10 paths, and then you're narrowing down to 3 or 4 paths pretty quickly. And then can you keep those 3 or 4 paths open before you narrow it down to 2? And then you're trying to decide between, blue red or red white, or you're trying to decide between red green or blue red. And then you're ultimately honing it down to 1. But the longer you can keep the other paths open, generally the better. but not always. I think the more we've done the podcast and the more I've drafted, I just kind of want to hope to end up in a deck like and have a smooth draft. Those are the best drafts. I mean, that's probably obvious,
Yeah.
but I think the thing I love about draft is pivoting and bobbing and weaving
Right.
and ducking and rounding the corner and feeling smart that I found this open lane that other people maybe wouldn't have left themselves an avenue to get into.
Mm-hmm.
But those still aren't oftentimes the best decks. The best
No,
decks are just the ones where you take red cards the whole way and like red's open and your deck is great because red was open, like where anybody could have drafted the seat. So I think I'm more open to doing that. But I think that's one of the things I like about MH3 is I think it does provide more opportunities to bob and weave than the average set.
for sure.
So if we're thinking about pivoting, week one, super hot on red, right? As the best color because of how flexible it was. I don't know that I still think red's the best color for me. I think if
Uh,
you like the Eldrazi life, green might be the best color for you. But I think red is the color that leaves you the most flexible to pivoting around. You
I just
probably get
like
into
all the red decks so much, and I don't like all the green decks. I mean, I know I was messing around 17 lands, just trying to check in yesterday with like my own feelings about the format because I still really don't like green black, and I don't really like green white that much either. But green white is doing well. Like it is a high performing color pair. I think just below red green and red white. But like I like red green, I like red white, I love red blue energy, and I know I'm talking about my dislike for red black, but I'll still play red black. I'm happy to draft it if it's open.
Yeah, all the red decks are good, and if
Yeah.
you're heavy red, you leave yourself out to pivot into all the red decks. It's very hard to train wreck
And
if
it's
you
got
start
nice
deep into red.
so many good little cross synergies, like in inherent cross synergies. That's like and it touches all the spaces really well, like the artifact space and the energy space and the Eldrazi space. Like, yeah, I really like red too.
And I think I'm not necessarily trying as hard to start red as I would in other formats. Like once I've identified a color I really like or a draft strategy I really like, I try to do it pretty hard. This format is too synergistic to do that with a color. Like you still have to follow the archetypes, I think, more than you follow a color. But if it works out for me to get into red, that is where I feel the safest and the most creative. But I'm coming around. There's been someone in the Discord who's been like lobbying me and you. I think they've been tagging both of us, maybe just me, for like brewing around in white. I'm kind of
Yes.
liking white as a space to brew lately, but
Yes.
I think white's just really open. I think the Eldrazi stuff's pretty contested largely, which is partially why I'm staying away from it because I don't want to fight for it. But there's other places other than red to do some brewing as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. And we've got good news, which is that the wheel seems to be back here. Play boosters be darned. We've got the wheel.
Wheels back. I love it. And I think paying attention to those cheap commons, like we said, sometimes you're going to get them on the wheel. And those are good cards. You're wheeling Sneaky Snackers. I think Riddlegate Gargoyles also another common one that wheels. But I think if you can pay attention to those cheap commons and just other synergy cards, I think you can get real gems on the wheel in this format if you identify an open archetype that other people at your table aren't drafting.
And I think that one of the skills in this format in particular is even if you have like a slam dunk clear first pick, is clocking those kinds of cards in your first few packs. And just having
Yes.
them rolling around in the back of your mind. Be like, okay, whatever. I'm going to take Chrysalis or I'm taking Genku. And these are just cards that are in my mind because we've been talking about them. But like, if there's a Sneaky Snacker in the pack, just make sure you're like, okay, I'm eyeballing that so that if the draft starts to go away where you're feeling like, this isn't actually that open, that should be your first direction to try and pivot to. If you're like, I mean, obviously, if there's something clear in the pack to pivot to, take that. But if then it's like, all right, flat power level, or this is a clear best card, and then I'm going some other route, well, then maybe you start to, I'm going to take this Wither and Bloom, even though it doesn't go with my Writhing Chrysalis, because that Sneaky Snacker might come around, and that's a backdoor for me.
Yes, absolutely. But I think that goes back to, I think, speculating aggressively as well. But speculating, it gives you when you clock those cheap commons early in the first few picks, it gives you a reason and a direction to speculate towards.
Mm-hmm. Right. Rather than it's just you're looking for in those flat power level packs, you're looking for tiebreakers. Like what is going to give weight to something? And if it's not something you've already picked, then you give weight to something that you might get in the future.
Yes. So I think for the commons, in priority order of seeing them, like just kind of how much they matter or push you towards stuff. I mean, Writhing Chrysalis, obviously number one. I think Conduit Goblin number two. I would say Riddlegate Gargoyle number three. Riddlegate Gargoyle goes way too late in the best of one queues on Arena, in my opinion. Just from my personal experience, I've been playing a lot of blue-white lately. Just also as I've been more willing to be base white, that's happened a lot more. Cranial Ram fourth, Sneaky Snacker fifth, Faithful Watchdog. I'm less jazzed about pivoting for a Faithful
I am
Watchdog at this
too.
point. And then past Faithful Watchdog, the rest really don't impact decisions that much for me. The other four,
I guess it's not wheeling because you're first picking it. The Snapping Void Craw, the blue-green ramper. You and LSV, you're just first picking it, so it'll never wheel.
I'm not first picking that card, to be clear. Yeah, that one does not matter to me so much, but that also is not likely to wheel. It's the idea of pivoting into Eldrazi at this point in the format is like mind blowing to me. I just cannot imagine
It's hard,
that
right?
happening.
You start energy or something, you start artifacts, and then like get something that pulls you into Eldrazi late. Like you're never getting past Chrysalis in pack one.
I mean, and you might in weird best of one pods, but I think generally the word is out on Eldrazi at this point.
Sure, yeah. Okay. So if you're not pivoting into Eldrazi, what would you be pivoting into and for what?
I mean, for me, most commonly is energy. The thing I've drafted the most by far are energy decks. And I think reasons to pivot into energy, I mean, it's the good energy cards. Amped Raptor, number one. Scurry of Gremlins, number two. Those are like the two clear best energy cards, I think, not close to close. And then I think as far as signals, the late Riddlegate Gargoyles or late Conduit Goblins, those would be things that like pique my interest. I'll speculate on, see if I can get into the deck. Past that, late Tune the Narratives or Galvanic Discharges. And it's weird because I think Galvanic Discharge certainly a better early pick than Riddlegate Gargoyles or Conduit Goblins, but I think it's less of a signal for an archetype. Like if we're talking about pivoting,
it's just good.
Yeah. So for you to want to pivot, at least for me, my thought process is I want to have identified an archetype that I think no one else is drafting so that I'm likely to get a lot of good gold cards late. So tunes and discharges. I also really like Emissary of Soulfire. That's the uncommon 1/4 that makes 3 energy, but I think it's less of a signal than the Riddlegate Gargoyles or the Conduit Goblins, or maybe it's on par with them, but it's easier to splash than those cards in like a Jeskai energy deck. I don't know. It's just kind of a different thing. And then lastly, the late engines, which are some of the most important cards for the energy deck. But also, I've gotten myself in trouble pivoting for these cards. So like your Is It Generatorium, your Phyrexian Ironworks. Phyrexian Ironworks is one that pretty consistently gets me in trouble when I try to pivot for it because like you really need, those are more reasons than they're more rewards than they are reasons. Almost all of the engine type cards, Unstable Amulet, you really need great ways to produce energy before those cards are good. Like you don't want to be playing the 4-drop 3/2 dragon, make 3 energy to turn on your Unstable Amulet, your Phyrexian Ironworks. Can you? Yes, but sometimes you end up in a spot where you have to be doing that because you moved in for some of the things that were supposed to be rewards rather than reasons. So I think I'm less willing to pivot into it for the late engines.
I was surprised to see you not list Royal Cartographer here. That's my one gripe. Because I think, and maybe you think Cartographer is less, like it's just a pure good card or something.
I think that's where it is, just a pure good card. But it's in the Amped Raptor Scurry of Gremlins tier, I think. Probably below those is where I would put it, but above the Gargoyles or the Conduit Goblins. As far as reasons to pivot, I think it's less of a reason to pivot into it for me because it doesn't make energy. It's tough. Like it kind of falls. It kind of
take your fetch lands, though. Take your fetch lands, baby.
I do take my fetch lands, but you got to get up to 6 before it does something. It to me falls almost in the engine category.
Yeah. See, I think of these cards, like, and again, don't need to get in the muck about this. Bespoke Battle Wagon and Cartographer. And Cartographer, I think, best of the bunch, clearly. But those two are in a different class than Generatorium, Ironworks, and Amulet to me.
We're going to get into the weeds because I disagree. Okay. I think Bespoke Battle Wagon is the worst of these, maybe other than Is It Generatorium. I've come way down on Bespoke Battle Wagon.
Really?
I have played it a lot. Like, so I feel pretty confident in my assessment of the card. It it takes a long time to get going. Like, for it to
Yeah.
be good, you don't want to be tapping it for 2 energy. Like, if
No.
you're ever tapping it for 2 energy, it's horrifically slow. Like,
Yes.
you really need, when it comes down, to already have 4 energy for it to be good, for it to be, it's a disaster, I think, if that's your turn 4 play and you don't already have
And you
4
can't
energy to turn
animate
it
it.
into a blocker, like to threaten to animate it. If you can accomplish that, very good card. But if you can't, it's really poor. So I think my ordering would be Cartographer 1, Unstable Amulet 2, Ironworks 3, Battle Wagon 4, Generatorium 5. But Battle Wagon has been pretty bad for me sometimes. And Ironworks too. Like, I've played with both of those cards a ton. Unstable Amulet is just good.
I think to zoom out a little bit from this is just to think about, like, one of the things is that, like, these are signals to pivot, yes, but then you also have to know, like, what they're not all going. It's not like, I'm pivoting into energy and that's a deck. It's like, no. You've got so many different flavors of the rainbow here, because there's red white aggro energy, there's blue white aggro energy, there's blue red control energy, there's, are you doing a Jeskai mix? Like, and
there's just like a Jeskai make as much energy as possible.
Right.
Decks also.
Right. Those are my favorite personally, but they're also little finicky. But yeah,
Finicky.
this is a great list of cards, and whatever order you have them in, whatever. But I think this is a great starting point for energy.
But it's also not as simple as, okay, I saw a pack 1, pick 6, Riddlegate Gargoyle. Now I'm blue white energy. I'm pivoting.
No,
like, that's not it. Like, that's the start of pivoting. Like, you've turned 10 degrees at that point. And there have to be subsequent things to happen, like future Riddlegate Gargoyles, or maybe you wheel attune the narrative or whatever, before you're willing to, like,
fully
turn all the way. You're just thinking about it at that point. You're maybe you're thinking about asking the girl out to prom. You haven't even thought about what the specific promposal is yet. Then you got to get to what you're going to do for the promposal. Then you got to execute. Then she's got to say yes. Like, there's a lot that still needs to happen.
For sure.
So if we're talking pivoting into artifacts, much smaller list. I think Crainial Ram 1, Ethereum Terramander 2, Refurbished Familiar 3. And then I think, just with the thought that you have to have the 1-drops and you have to be explosive for black-red.
Again, and maybe this is just a good card. Does Marionette Apprentice not belong on this list?
Yeah, I mean, it does in the sense that it goes in the deck, but to me, that's not a signal to draft black-red artifacts. That's a signal to draft
black. Okay.
Yes, and like, I think I was thinking about pivoting into a specific archetype. And Marionette Apprentice is just a good card. Also, probably for me, I'm sure my win rate with Marionette Apprentice is abysmal, because I just pivot way too much for it early in the format before I knew what I was doing. And then last list is reasons to pivot out of Eldrazi, which I think is a pretty important skill set at this point if you're going to go after the deck. So I think things that you should be aware of if you're thinking about pivoting out of Eldrazi: feeling like green is cut. I think that would be thing number 1. Like, you're not seeing just the dearth of green commons that you would expect. Like, if you're not seeing some late Nightshade Dryads or some late Eldrazi repurposers, or even the stupid adaptive root wall.
When you say late, what do you mean?
I mean, like, picks 6 through 8.
Okay.
Like, if you're not seeing those types of cards there, if you're not wheeling, like if on the wheel there's no green cards or whatever, like, and there are sneaky snackers, or there are Riddlegate Gargoyles, like, you better believe, personally, I'm thinking about, okay, can I get out of this? I think the other thing that runs into you maybe wanting to pivot out of Eldrazi is feeling like you're having to spend higher picks on some of those common enablers, like the things that will ramp you, or maybe like a Basking Brood Scale. If you're spending a high pick on a Basking Brood Scale, which is the adapt Root Walla, it's really tough for me to take something like Basking Brood Scale to pair with my Writhing Chrysalis over a Conduit Goblin, for example. Like, there's just a huge gap in power level between those cards. And I know I keep coming back to Conduit Goblin because I think that's kind of the poster child for best common in a streamlined archetype that can go late, depending on what your draft pot is doing.
Yeah. Well, because I think you're not only talking about the power of the card when you're comparing Brood Scale to Conduit Goblin, you're also talking about the power of the deck you expect to get when you're making those picks at the time you're making them. Like, the power when you're taking like Conduit Goblin is a much higher pick for the energy deck than Brood Scale is for a green Eldrazi deck. And so getting Conduit Goblin early, you feel fine because you're like, I'm going to get to support this. Taking Brood Scale early, you're like, ugh, this is when I'm supposed to be taking some of my best cards, and I'm
Yes.
taking like a fine role player for the deck.
Right. How are you on the modified life? Like I
I told you.
just basically haven't played it though. Like I played green white once early in the format and it was awesome. But since then I just have gotten into it way less because I've moved Faithful Watchdog down in my pick order. And it's really tough to be green white if you don't aggressively take Faithful Watchdogs.
One of the things that I realized, this is just from one draft, but one of the things I kind of realized in this draft, I drafted a green white deck the other day. I think I took an early Wombat because I was like, I kind of want to like try, like take this early, see if it's open. It seemed like it's been consistently open in the draft. So I felt like an early Wombat. And we talked about last week being like, I think Cursed Wombat like is the reason to draft that deck. So I took those early, ended up sort of getting moved off of it, played green white, splashing a couple Wombats. But the bleed isn't there that I was sort of intellectually. I was like, oh, there's going to be like overlap because it's Abzan modified, but it
There's not.
really
It's very
isn't.
distinct.
It's auras and it's enchantments and artifacts for green white, and it's counters for black green. But the weird thing is that the Watchdog makes me think that there's bleed there,
yeah,
but there isn't. And so
there
like,
isn't, because you have to be super streamlined green white for the Watchdog to be good.
and you think like, well, the Watchdog with the Wombat, it's like, then it's a 4/4. Who cares? Like, it's not that big of a deal.
Well, and you also have a green white card and a green black card that are 2-drops.
That are 2-drops, yes. Yeah. So
I think you definitely want to avoid if you're trying to be something that's not winning the late game.
So that was one thing that I like realized was like, oh, there's not like, and I'm sure, and if I'm willing to be proven wrong or show me like folks in the Discord showing us about how to cook with white last week, like willing to be proven wrong if folks want to share some decks that are good in the Abzan space so that there's some synergies I'm missing. But I think in the streamlined sense, I'm not that excited about those color pairs.
I agree. And I think the thing, and so I don't have much advice for how to pivot into it because I just haven't been doing that. But I think the thing that it suffers from is it loses the early game to good energy decks and good artifacts decks.
And red white.
Red white. That's good energy decks.
Yeah.
And then it loses the late game to the Eldrazi decks. Like it's just at a weird spot on the game length, desired game length for the format. Like it's not, it's scissors in a format where you either want to be paper or rock.
Yeah.
All right. So if we're taking a look at some specific drafts here, we got my first log. You ready to take a seat at the old round table here?
Yeah, and I think we'll treat this. We're going to try and zoom into some pivot points rather than get in the muck about each pick.
So pack one, pick one. You start off the Daddy-O himself, Writhing Chrysalis in your pile. You're snapping it up. Some other good green cards to note, but Writhing Chrysalis, I think a pretty clear pick there.
I think it's worth pointing out, as we were talking about before, there is a Sneaky Snacker in the pack and a Riddlegate Gargoyle in the pack. Two of the like cards that we're thinking about. Okay, let's make sure, even though we're taking the Daddy-O first, let's make sure we're clocking those as possible wheels.
Yes, we also get questions about clocking a lot. That means taking note of.
Thank you.
You're like noticing, yes.
This is the Lords of Limited glossary here.
Yes. I think clocking and taking a flyer are two most common slang things that we do in these draft log reviews. Pack one, pick two. I think a clear solar transformer out of a fairly flat pack. This is kind of the start we were talking about, where you have Writhing Chrysalis. You want to keep following Writhing Chrysalis, so you do, because there's nothing else good enough that pulls you in another direction. And one of the best things you can do with Writhing Chrysalis is cast it on turn 3, and Solar Transformer helps you do that. Also helps you splash it if you need to. Pack one, pick 3. It's a little more interesting here. I think you've got a choice between Kozilek's Unsealing, which is the 2 and a blue uncommon enchantment. Whenever you cast something mana value 7 or greater, you draw 3. If it's a creature, 4, 5, or 6, you make the 2 spawn tokens. There's also a Wither in Bloom in the pack. 1 and a black instant, target creature gets -3/-3. Any thoughts between those two?
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it's my aversion. I get a little Ben in me here, being averse to taking Unsealing. I just feel like everything has to go right for Unsealing to be good, like in the draft. And if everything's going right in the draft, I'm going to get a good deck anyway. I just found Unsealing to be a little finicky, so I might just take Wither and Bloom. I guess you could also just take, like, there's a couple green MDFCs that you could take too. We're really just in flat power level territory here, I think.
Yes. I think one thing that's interesting to note is when I was doing this draft and I had the Chrysalis, I, again, don't have that much experience piloting the Eldrazi deck. I played against it a ton, but I think this is something that can happen to listeners of the podcast too, where you hear content creators talk about cards or a deck that's great, like you want to be Eldrazi. And to me, I would have said prior to, I think, largely piloting the deck that I did yesterday in the open as a sealed deck that had Path of Annihilation, I would have told you that Kozilek's Unsealing was equivalent to Path of Annihilation in terms of power level. But in reality, there's a pretty big power level gap there, right? Path of Annihilation is significantly better than Kozilek's Unsealing.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
That's very fair in my mind. Like the path making the 2 spawn is huge.
Up front, right?
Yeah.
With no work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I did take the Kozilek's Unsealing here. So let's move forward with that. Following it up, super terrible pack, very flat. It's taking a Frogmere Enforcer as a 7-drop to maybe like go along with our Kozilek's Unsealing, which is probably not right here. But we also have the Solar Transformer. I don't know what I was thinking with this pick, but there's basically nothing. There's a Pluto Delta. There's a Grixis Landscape. There's some blue and some black cards. Only red card in the pack, Thriving Skyclaw. No green cards in the pack. That's more the relevant thing here rather than what I took.
Is what's not here.
Yes, because the pack is horrible. So you're putting no weight on this pick, but you are thinking, oh, like maybe I'm going to need to get off Eldrazi at this point.
And this is such a great example because there's a clear signal or the potential of a signal that you shouldn't be drafting what you're drafting. But there is no direction presented.
Nothing, yes.
Yeah.
Nothing that says, hey, do this other thing instead.
It's just like, you probably don't want to do the thing you're doing.
So pack 1, pick 5. Again, like very terrible flat pack here. There's another Grixis Landscape. There's an MDFC and Bridgeworks battle. The green MDFC that's +2/+2 in fight. And then there's a Golden Tail Trainer, which is the green-white uncommon. But again, I'm just not willing to pivot for that card. No. And even if this were Faithful Watchdog, which I think is better or more important to the deck, not willing to pivot for that at this point. Might take Faithful Watchdog as a speculative pick, but it would have to be something pretty good. But right now I'm thinking I'm going to do some sort of Teamer Eldrazi stew still.
But to be clear, if there were Conduit Goblin, Riddlegate Gargoyle, Sneaky Snacker,
now is the time where you'd be speculating.
You would take all 3 of those here, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's
Crainial Ram.
Yeah. I would take Crainial Ram. I'd be less excited about the Crainial Ram because
it would make your Frogmere Enforcer.
Make a Frogmere Enforcer not embarrassing. Yeah. that pick. This was very early on in the format, to be clear. So I took a Seething Landscape here. Pick 6. Again, like no green. There's a Foul Strike as the only green card in the pack. So basically, after first picking Chrysalis and wanting to be Eldrazi, we've not managed to take a green card. So like at this point, I'm like, okay, we've got to pivot off of this at this point.
So you're still not really being presented with something. I mean, there's a Party Thrasher, which is pretty good. The 1 in a red 1/4 that lets you sort of like loot through. Like you can exile a card from your hand and then reveal
Card's
2.
Fine. It doesn't give you card advantage though.
No, it's just selection. And it's like sort of roll of the dice selection.
So to me, I took Wither and Bloom here, thinking that I remembered there was a Sneaky Snacker in pack 1, pick 1 that I could potentially wheel. And I already had this Kozilek's Unsealing. I was thinking maybe there was going to be some weird draw 3 like hybrid Eldrazi thing that I could do.
That's kind of cool.
Brew a little bit with Kozilek's Unsealing. That's where my head was at this point. And then pick 7, took a Drownyard Lurker to keep the Eldrazi dream alive, as well as maybe make Kozilek's Unsealing functional in some sort of a blue-black draw 3 deck had I wheeled the Sneaky Snacker. Pick 8, again, there's nothing, no red or green cards, and there is a Kami of Jealous Thirst. So I took that for the blue-black deck, and then pick 9, ding, 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 ding. We do wheel a Sneaky Snacker, don't wheel the Riddlegate Gargoyle. So very lucky that we wheeled the Snacker, not the Gargoyle, after building towards it. But I think even if Gargoyle wheels, you're taking Gargoyle, and you're just trying to figure some stuff out. Because what you started down was not open, as well as you saw horrible packs.
It's also not luck that like black cards flowed and then the blue-black gold card wheeled, right? Like,
yeah, that's fair.
You're probably not going to see that happen. So like you probably would have seen white cards open if Gargoyle was going to be.
And then I would have been a good drafter and take the white cards. All right, sure. Not luck. I'm great at drafting.
You're great at drafting.
Love that take.
I think that's just a great like the middle of the draft, whatever. Like you might look at this log. We'll share it in the show notes. You might go, oh man, I would have made different picks in the middle. That's less important than. Are you tracking the information that we're tracking here of like, okay, it's drying up. I don't have a clear.
Eldrazi's not open. Like the
Eldrazi
things
is
that
not.
matter.
Yeah.
What you pick in picks 3 through 7, 6 is largely irrelevant. Like you just have to notice that Eldrazi's not open and black is.
When
While
you're
the packs are terrible, which is tough.
And like, are you putting yourself? What I do like about Ben's picks is, one, he's got the sneaky snacker in the back of his mind, and two, he's just like giving himself outs. Like, this isn't working, because I think one of the things that happens for my train wrecks is that I go, this isn't working, but I don't know what else I'm supposed to do, so I'm just gonna try and do this thing even harder. And like,
I don't like doing that in this format.
it's terrible. Those are like the worst drafts I have, but like, I can't be alone. And so that's why I think I want to highlight it here, to be like, what you want to do is, when it's like the thing I'm doing isn't working and I'm not being given anything else that's clear, you can kind of go into panic mode easily. And I think this is a great example of how to not go into panic mode.
I had a draft that I think we're probably not going to have time to get to, but started with a very good Eldrazi start. Like, just want to kind of narrate what Ethan's talking about there, where I'm very averse to, like, I'm just going to hold on and pray. I took Nadu pack 1, Eldrazi Repurposer pick 2, Invert Polarity pick 3, Tune pick 4, Ironworks, got a way late territory color pick 6. And I was thinking, yes, like, this is it. I finally get to do Temur Eldrazi. And then took a pick 8 Conduit Goblin, pack 1 pick 8 Conduit Goblin with no other white cards, and Ironworks is my only red card. But like, I'm fine going into red-white energy with a Conduit Goblin and Ironworks. And the pack rounded out with not much else other than a thriving Skyclaw. But pack 2 pick 1, I opened Ocelot Pride and no green cards. There's a Nightshade Dryad. And I was streaming and chat was like, well, just take Nightshade Dryad and pray. Like, you've got a good Eldrazi start. And like, I just refuse to take a Nightshade Dryad pick 1, pack 2.
Well,
like,
and this is an example of, I think, if you don't get the pick 8 Conduit Goblin, I like taking Ocelot Pride a lot less.
Right,
it's the
but
combo of that information of, I got the late red-white card, I'm opening this busted white 1-drop. That combination is going to say, let's try and do this.
Well, and even then, I'm still thinking, when I take this Ocelot Pride, I'm thinking, I'm probably not going to play white. Like, that's literally my thought process after I make this pick. I'm thinking, I'm still, when we were talking about asking yourself those questions, I'm still, like, in my mind, 80 or 90% to be Temur Eldrazi. It was open enough in pack 1 that if it's where I'm supposed to be, I assume I will get a comparable card to Nightshade Dryad to fill up my 2-drop slot. But if it's not where I'm supposed to be and white flows, like, this is my chance to get into white if it's going to happen. This is very low opportunity cost. I'm giving up a Nightshade Dryad for the chance at spiking an insane white deck. So I take the Pride, still think I'm not playing white, and then pack 2 pick 2, I get past Wrath of the Skies. And then all of a sudden I'm like, great, like, thrilled. And that's how you pivot there. Like, you take speculative picks on high stealing cards, and that's the way it had to happen. And that's like, whatever, 5% to happen in a draft or something. But I left myself open to that 5% by speculating on high ceiling cards.
That's the thing that makes it so hard to podcast about, I think, or like, I really wanted to do this, but as we were prepping for the episode, trying to figure out what's the best way to do it, is because it's not just one like aha moment. It's not just and then you are presented this pick 6 and it's a clear pivot and that's the direction your draft goes. It's like, take that, and now you're giving that 20% weight, and you're giving the rest of what you've taken 80% weight in terms of where you're going to probably end up at the end of the draft. But then you take that 20% plus, and then how late is it? And then is there another card that follows up with it that's also a pivot card? And then what do you open? And then what do you get past in pack 2? Like, there's all of these elements to it, combined to how you read signals.
It's very much a Rube Goldberg machine.
Yeah.
Like a different one every time. Like, sometimes the tennis ball drops straight down and bounces, and sometimes the tennis ball rolls through a little chute. Like, it's always different. But I think let's just take another look at another draft. I think going through them and talking about thought processes are the best thing we can do. So this is another one of mine. Pack 1, pick 1. You take a Spymaster's Vault. That's the black land that can let you connive. Out of a very weak pack.
Yeah, super flat. Like it weak in the sense of there's probably like 4 cards you can. It's like a cube pack. There's like 4 cards you could take, and that's totally fine depending on where you want to go.
But I think just for the sake of this, like telling you where we went, easier.
Yes.
So pack 1, pick 2, again, super flat pack. You take a refurbished familiar to go along with your Spymaster's Vault, and I think you're clocking Riddlegate Gargoyle that could potentially wheel, as well as like there's some good green. There's an Eldrazi Repurposer. There's a Signature Slam, but nothing good enough to make me want to take something other than a black card after starting with a black card. So take Refurbished Familiar, pack 1, pick 2. Pack 1, pick 3. There is a spike in power level here that wants you to move off black. So the best card in the pack, far and away, Territory Color. That's the 4 and a green uncommon, the 7/5 reach. Landfall, whenever a land enters the battlefield, you can look at the top. If it's a creature, you get to draw it. And if it's not, you can surveil it into your graveyard. That card's insane. You take it here. And then pack 1, pick 4. The green keeps flowing. So there's kind of a choice here between Fell the Profane as an MDFC, destroy target creature or planeswalker that's black, or Evolution Witness, which is the adapt regrowth, the Eternal Witness card. And I landed on the Evolution Witness after taking the Territory Color because I thought it was a stronger signal for green. So like I just picked Spymaster's Vault and then second picked the Refurbished Familiar out of a very weak pack because I had the Spymaster's Vault. But as far as signals, we've seen better green signals. Like the third pick Territory Color, fourth pick Evo Witness, along with a Brood Scale still being in the pack here and a Collective Resistance. Like I feel like that's why I want to take the Evo Witness rather than Fell the Profane. Because the argument you could make is, well, Fell the Profane gives you 3 black cards. But like, I don't really want to be black. And I'm seeing
the best
great
card
reasons.
you have is color.
Right, is green, and green's the best color in the format and leads to the better decks in the format. So I think that's why I want to take Witness here. As far as pivoting. Pack 1, pick 5, take a Breathe Your Last out of a very weak pack. That's the black 1 instant speed, destroy target creature or planeswalker. And then this is where the pivoting maybe starts to happen. So pack 1, pick 6. You've got 2 green cards, the Evo Witness and the Color. You've got 2 black cards, the Refurbished Familiar and the Breathe Your Last, as well as the Spymaster's Vault. And you see a choice between Sneaky Snacker, the blue-black 2/1 flyer. When you draw your third card, it comes back into play, as well as Arcbound Condor, the 2 black flying modular 3. Whenever another artifact enters the battlefield, your control target creature and opponent controls gets -1/-1 until end of turn. And then there's also a Kami of Jealous Thirst here, which you're not picking, but worth noting for the blue-black draw 3 deck.
This is really hard. This is a really hard pick, I think. Like, I would like to think that I would take Sneaky Snacker in the moment because I think it's like more signally, going to lead to a better deck. I think I might just take Condor in the moment, which I think is a mistake.
The thought process of what? Like, where do you see yourself ending up if you take the Condor?
Black-green bad deck?
Well, that's the thing. Like, you could make a case for Condor, but if we're talking about trying to make cards hit their ceilings, right? Like, that's what my mindset is always towards. Like, can I get this card in its optimal home where it's going to be performing its best? And like, you could say, well, Condor's modular. It's got +1/+1 counters for black green, so it's going to be doing that thing. And you've already got the Refurbished Familiar. Like, but I just think
you're just
Condor
already going to be
is
pulled in so many different directions because you're going to be wanting artifacts for your Familiar and your Condor, but green isn't going to provide that at all.
Right. That's my thought, is that we're going to end up with a lot of intrinsically good cards that are not in close to their best home, which I think is a recipe for disaster in this format. That's why I didn't take Condor here, because you could take it and say, well, I'm going to be black-green. Like, this is going to be great. I'm going to do black-green counters. And I just don't think that's a very good deck. And I think also you're not giving up that much here. Like, if you are going to be green-black, you're not, like, Arcbound Condor is not a critical piece of a good black-green deck. Would it go in there? Would you play it? Yeah, sure, probably. Sneaky Snacker is a critical piece of a blue-black deck. It is one of the most important cards.
And you're likely to, if you end up in blue-black, so if you think of like, okay, what's the archetype I'm going to end up in when I take Snacker? Well, it's blue-black. How many picks of what you've drafted are going to make this blue-black deck? It's only 2. It's only Breathe Your Last and Vault. Maybe Refurbished Familiar, but you're not going to give any weight to that. And blue is not really giving you any artifacts to ramp that out. But I think that's okay. Like, I think it's okay to be like, I'm going to throw away 3 picks if I end up blue-black, because you're giving yourself an out to the ceiling of an archetype.
Yes, that's where my head's at. And with the cards we've drafted so far, it looks like we've got a black-green start. Why not stick with the black-green start with Condor? But like, if you go back to those questions you're asking yourself, I think at this point I'm like 10% to be black-green or something, because I don't want to be black-green. Like, to me, I have some black cards that could go in an artifacts deck. And I also think Spymaster's Vault's best home is blue-black because
Right.
it helps with the card draw synergy. And then I think I've got some black cards that could be blue-black. I've got some black cards that could be black-red. Like I think there's a world where I could pivot into black-red. And then I think my green cards are, I could be green Eldrazi, or I could be like green-white or whatever. I'm really not thinking I have the start to a green-black deck here, which is another reason why I think it's easier for me to take Sneaky Snacker because of how I'm bucketing the 5 cards I've already taken in my brain.
Can I ask you to put into like, so when you take Sneaky Snacker here, do you think that's now the most likely spot you end up in?
No. I mean, maybe. I think the one thing that worries me here that we haven't shouted about this pick also is there's no green cards. But that's kind of the fun thing about play boosters. Used to would have been, you see a pack with no green cards and you're like, great, I am off this territory color and Eternal Witness.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't quite do that now. I still think it's a pretty big data point that there's literal 0 green cards, but it's possible that the pack just had weird correlation. I mean, we did get a late territory color. We saw the late Evolution Witness. So I kind of forgot the initial question here. Ask me that again.
I was just asking, like,
I was like in an interview, just fumbling around.
It's all good.
Just keep talking and try to sound smart.
You gave good information. I was just asking, like, when you take Sneaky Snacker here, are you like, well, I'm still probably 10%.
Is it my most likely archetype?
Because I think it might be.
I don't know. I think if I were assigning percentages, I think it's all equally spread between. It's equally spread between black red, blue black,
green X,
and green X. I think like 33% to each of those probably right now. No, that's probably not true. Like there's like 10% in there. So maybe it's 30, 30, 30, 10% for actual straight black green.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe it's 25 to all of them.
So
but it's not heavily weighted towards Sneaky Snacker because this is the first time. Like this is,
but it's also not low. Like when you took Ocelot Pride of like, it's probably not going to make my deck. Like
correct. Yes, correct. Higher than that. Yeah, I think if we're talking about percentages that I expect, it's probably like, a very reasonable chance. But this is just starting to open the door. Mm-hmm. I don't see this pick 6 and I'm like, great, got a late signal. I'm blue black now.
I think that's my big takeaway is I just need to be a little bit more tempered because I think because it's easier, what I want is to either be like, this is my direction or like this direction is closed. I want to clearly open doors and go down them, or I want to clearly close doors. And you're taking a much more measured approach with this draft.
Well, so I think this is all jokes aside. I think this is a difference in how you and I draft. I'm treading carefully here. I see Ethan's eyebrows raising. We have a very different
Please don't
sorting.
Insult me on the morning of the Arena Open.
We have a very different sorting and drafting process. Like you are, after every pick, you want to see your deck that you expect it to be. And when you start to pivot, you take all the cards and put them in the sideboard. And you're like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. And then you don't forget about them. Yeah. But the next pick, if you pivot back, you'll be like, pull all those cards out of the sideboard and put the other ones in the sideboard. You always want to be looking at the cards you expect to play. And you judge me a lot for like, I want to see all my cards that I could play laid out in front of me. That's why I don't always have my deck built at the end of the draft. And you always like to poke fun at me about it. And I like to give it back to you because it's mine's just a little more free flowing, I think, than your process is.
Yeah, that's very fair. Yeah. I think I will not. I don't need to. I'm like every fiber of my being like wants to just like get you back, but
attack back me.
But it's a fair point. And like I've always thought that that process was best, and I hadn't thought about the like sort of the possibility that then it maybe closes me off. Because you're right. I don't forget about those cards. I'm very cognizant of my possibilities.
Right, that's what I mean.
But I want to be able to see. I feel like I get the most out of my future picks if I see exactly how stuff is going to slot into what I see the deck being, rather than just like, we got a little soup here and let's just figure out we don't know what seasonings we're going to need, how this soup is going to end up. And I think that's fair. That's a fair point. That's actually, you know what? You didn't insult me. You gave me some good fodder as we go into draft 1 of the Arena Open.
You'll love to see it. So just to kind of close this draft out, next pick, there's a Blood-Soaked Insight. That's the black-red MDFC. Took that there as maybe a hedge into black-red. Plus, at this point, I'm feeling like I'm going to be black something.
Okay.
After taking Blood-Soaked Insight, because there's also a Riddlegate Gargoyle.
I know, that's what
I'm choosing not to spec on. Because again, that touches none of my colors. Like I'm just nowhere near the energy space right now. So I don't really see that as a viable pivot option, despite the fact that it's here and there's a Phyrexian Ironworks here. Like, there's some signals for energy.
And there was a Gargoyle pick 2, so that's worth throwing it out there. But the thing that and I feel myself already getting constricted as because I thought I saw this pick and I was like, oh man, why not just take Gargoyles? But the more of those speculative, there's a diminishing returns. The more of those speculative picks you make, you give yourself less time to wiggle out of them because you don't have as many picks, right? So if you take Gargoyle here,
you almost have to just, if you want to get into it,
you've got 1 or 2 picks to decide.
Yes.
Whereas if you just say, I'm black, you basically have the rest of this pack, and then you let the beginning of pack 2 sort of inform the wheel / the beginning of pack 2 inform your direction. And that's so much more breathing room.
Yes, that's how I feel about it. That's why I took the insight here and didn't spec on the Gargoyle, because I already specced on the Snacker. There's definitely diminishing returns. Pick 8 though, I do spec on a Crainial Ram. There's a Crainial Ram here in black as well as a Victimize, but I think it's very real that once we've decided we're black, now we could be black-red. You've got the Familiar, that turns Familiar into a good card. So basically at this point, I've scrapped, once I take Crainial Ram here, pack 1, pick 8, I'm scrapping the green cards. No longer, I think I'm 0% to play color or Evo Witness. I'm 100% to play black, and I'm trying to figure out whether I'm black-red or black-blue or black something else.
Okay, I jumped ahead. I'm looking at this deck. So you end up in mostly mono red, but you've got a handful of black cards. 2 cards I need to ask you a question about.
Okay.
1, there's a Ruby Medallion, which is an artifact for your black-red deck and your mono-red deck. Was this good?
It was not bad.
Okay.
It was a couple times I remember drawing it late and it was embarrassing, but the times I played it on turn 2, it was nuts.
That's pretty sick. And then Wheel of Potential. That's a spice.
It was explosive, baby. This deck was explosive. I had double Unstable Amulet, Wheel of Potential. There was a lot of times I vomited my hand and then wheeled for if my opponent had 3 cards in hand, I'd wheel for 4 or whatever, and maybe they get 1 extra card, but I get 4. It was a cool deck.
That is sweet. That's really sweet. Yeah, this has been a great conversation for me, and so I can only imagine that I hope it's been fruitful for our listeners as well.
All right, great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, Salty Pretzels, for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
You can find all of our content on our website, lordsoflimited.com. Links to our episode backlog, our YouTube channel. You can find my Arena Open, hopefully runs, Draft 1 and Draft 2 up there later this week. You find our streams on Twitch. Ben is streaming up a storm, courtesy of #summer break. We've got our merch, courtesy of TeePublic, our Patreon page, reward tiers, all that stuff over at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.